Please be seated. I'm in 5 Bible studies a week. Now that's more than anybody should be in, I think, right? 5 Bible studies a week. I bet our bishop isn't in that many. I bet the Pope isn't in that many. I bet Jesus wouldn't be in that many. It's too many for anybody, probably. But every single one brings me something wonderful. Every one is with different people. There's very little overlap between them. And every group is distinct and amazing and so fun. It's really not work. It is the delightful part of what I do. I recommend Bible study groups to everybody. I think everyone would benefit from having a small group where they can talk and study. Our prayer book says, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest the Holy Scriptures. 5 Bible studies a week. You'd think I would know everything there is to know about the Bible, wouldn't you? You would think I would know everything there is to know about the Bible and God and Jesus. You think I would be a walking, talking Bible encyclopedia. But here's the secret. I don't go to all these Bible studies because I get to find answers, although that happens sometimes. I go to them because I get to hear the questions. I get to hear your questions. Questions about God and questions about the Bible, and questions about life, and questions about death, and questions about spirituality. Really, the big questions, you guys, come up over and over and over and over. And so do the small ones. All kinds of questions. And they are all so life-giving, these questions. You know, my favorite bumper sticker of all time. Trust those with questions. Distrust those with answers. Trust those with questions. Distrust those who have all the answers. Why do I love the questions so much in these Bible studies? Because I think they are the very questions that our sacred texts were written to answer. In other words, I think that the questions that you have are the exact same questions to which the Scriptures were addressed. I think many of our questions are the same questions that the first readers of these texts also had. And when we read the texts and ask these questions, I believe we're plopping ourselves down right smack into the middle of the early church, sitting among the disciples and the early believers, where the first and the second and third generation of readers, Jew and Gentile, Roman and Greek, sat and read or heard read these exact same texts, the exact same ones. And I'm telling you, it just happened. It gives me chills to think this, that we are doing the exact same thing that the first church did. Okay, here's what I mean. This wedding in Cana. Now, you've heard this story before, yes? The wedding in Cana. You know it. Jesus and Mary and the disciples at a wedding, which in those days meant not just one day, not just an evening, but a week-long celebration. So lots to eat and lots to drink. And in those days, the best thing to drink was actually something fermented, because the water was a little dicey. Yeah? And they had water there, but it was in these big clay vats, and that water wasn't for drinking, it was for washing up. So when the wine runs out at this wedding, it's a huge deal. It's an inconvenience for the guests, and it's a scandal for the hosts who've run out of wine for their guests. And so Jesus' mother, Mary, says to the guy in charge of the wine, this steward, she says, hey, listen, I'm going to talk to my son, and you just do what he says. And if you'll just do whatever he says, it's going to work out just fine for everybody. Okay? So the guy does, and Jesus does, and this unfit water becomes totally fit wine. And in fact, the text says it's really, really good wine. And the guy shakes his head and serves the wine, and the party is saved, and the disaster is averted. And the question is, why? Why does Mary care? And why does Jesus care? And why doesn't the steward tell everybody, hey, you won't believe it? Because that's not what he does. And why doesn't everybody freak out at this miracle? Yeah? And why? And this is always my big question when I get to this story. Why is this the first public miracle that Jesus performs in John's gospel? Wouldn't you think it'd be something more dramatic, you know? He turns water into wine at a wedding. And nobody knows about it except the disciples in the story. Yeah? Why? And the answer is, I have no idea. What do you think? This is what I love about, I wish we were just a Bible study right now, because you could tell me, well, I think it's this, or I think it's that, or I've always wondered, or I never cared, or why do you care? You know? Like, I would love to know why. Okay, if you ask me, did it really happen? I say, yes, it happened. But why didn't Matthew record it? Why didn't Mark? Why did all Matthew, Mark, and Luke were all written before John's gospel? Why did John reach way back into the stories of the community and say, this is the one I want to use first? Why? Why is it even here at all? It is in no way as big a deal as the healings and the miraculous feedings and the resuscitations, all of which are going to show up in John's gospel in the next 11 chapters. Doesn't this miracle seem sort of trivial? More like a party trick than a real miracle. Something David Blaine could do on television quite easily. Yeah? For me, the answer to why is this miracle here and what does it mean, the answer to that question is found immediately preceding this story in John's gospel. So we're in John 2, verse 1, but right before this. So will you do something that you won't want to do? Will you reach into the pew in front of you and pull out the Holy Bible? It's the black one. Yeah? The red one's the Book of Common Prayer. The blue one's the hymnal. Turn to page 923. The great thing about having pew Bibles, as you know, is everybody's on the same page. 923. Page 923. So John, right? John's Gospel, chapter 2, verse 1. Now, look at the verses directly preceding this, at the very end of the first chapter. Because I think this is the informative part. Jesus has just called his newest disciple, Nathanael. Philip has said, listen, you got to hear about this guy Jesus. And Nathanael says, I don't know. And Jesus comes around. And Nathanael is pretty skeptical. But Jesus tells him stuff he shouldn't have known about him. And Nathanael says, wow, you know all that about me? Well, maybe you are the big deal that Philip keeps saying that you are. To which Jesus says what? Now, this is the part. It's right before what we get today. Right before chapter 2. It says, you believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You will see greater things than that. You will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. And I'm sure Nathanael was like, well, okay, you've got my attention. I'm listening. Can't wait to see that part. But, and this is the great thing, if you're reading this at home by yourself, or if you're even better in a group reading this, the great thing is that we do not read right next, as you would expect, about the heavens opening and the angels of God ascending and descending. Instead, we hear or read about the wedding in Cana. Maybe the least of the miracles in John's Gospel. And we think, is that all you got? You can turn water into wine? That's it? Right? Where's the angels? So I have a question for you. Now you can put the Bible away because I'm going to talk to you more about it, but I don't want to step through the whole thing. So I have a question for you. See, my point in having you look at that is when we get a text, always look around it, the beginning and the end, and just what's after it and what's before, because that's where the real information is, why it's chosen. Well, here's my question for you. Would this miracle in Cana, this changing of water into wine, would it, by itself, without knowing anything else about the rest of the miracles, would that miracle be enough for you to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God? I doubt it. I don't think it would be enough for you. It wouldn't be enough for me, I don't think. Okay? So hang on. Read on. happens next? Chapter 4. What if you saw a young boy healed of a deadly disease with just a word from a distance? Which happens, interestingly enough, to take place right back here in Cana. So he goes away, comes back to Cana, gets this other miracle, second miracle. A boy is healed who's sick, but he doesn't even lay hands on him. He says, your son is well. Is that enough? And it's funny, it's right here that Jesus says to them right after that healing, he says to them, sort of scolding them, unless you people see signs and wonders, you will never believe. Is he talking to the disciples? Is he talking to the second century readers of John? Is he talking to us? Feels like all of that to me. Yeah? So, what sign, what wonder, what miracle did it take, or perhaps if you're not there yet, will it take for you to believe? What sign, what miracle, what wonder would it take? Okay, next chapter. Guy was sick for 38 years. 38 years. Nobody can help him. Jesus heals him. Is that enough for you? Huh? Next chapter. Takes 5 loaves and 2 fish and feeds 5,000 people. Is that the one? Same chapter, nighttime, middle of a stormy lake. Here comes Jesus, walking on the water. What do you think of him now? Yeah? Chapter 9, guy born blind. Now, in those days, it was a big deal. Nobody knew how to cure somebody who had been born blind. It was impossible. But guess what? Jesus restored his sight. How you feeling now? Have you heard enough? Do you believe yet? Still skeptical, you bunch of Nathaniels? How about this one? Chapter 11. His best friend Lazarus, dead as a doornail. 4 days dead now, brother. 4 days dead. Not faking it, not some televangelist trick. Really dead. Stinky dead, it says. Yeah? Oops, guess what? Here he comes, out of the cave, walking, alive, smelling like roses. Okay, add it all up. Do you believe? But still, I have to say, no angels. No descending, no ascending. We were promised angels, you know. And you know what? Near as I can tell, we never do get those angels. At least in John's Gospel, it's not recorded that it ever happened. And so maybe that's still coming. Maybe that's the second coming. I don't know. What do you think, you know? If the wedding at Cana was the first sign, maybe the angels ascending and descending will be the last sign. I don't know. Reserved for the end, when God makes everything right, and we will have no choice then but to believe. Maybe that is what it will finally take for the most skeptical of all the Nathaniels. I don't know. Heck, I go to 5 Bible studies a week, and it feels like I hardly know anything, right? It seems like the more I study, the less I know for sure. But for everything I don't know, there is one thing I do know. I should say one thing I do believe. Chapter 20. On the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene and 2 other women went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed. You know that story, don't you? Okay. John is saying, if you don't believe yet, by the time you get to the 20th chapter, after hearing about miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle, and if you think about it, they're ascending in miraculousness. If you don't believe by now, how about this one? Try this. I have eyewitnesses, he says, to the fact that Jesus was tortured, killed, buried, 3 days later, he rose from the dead. Eyewitnesses. Can I tell you, that's the one that got me? I believe. I believe that that tomb was empty. I absolutely do believe that that happened. And since I believe that it happened, I believe then that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And I gave my life over to him. And every day I give it over again. I finally came to believe. It was finally enough for me. What about you? Maybe you're already there. Maybe you're not. Maybe you know someone who's not there. But the question is, what would it take for you to believe?